These are the 5 strongest Adderall natural alternatives that I know of. And when it comes to actually Adderall, we have to think about what is it specifically doing? Well, in theory, it is specifically targeting dopamine and norepinephrine. So when we're looking at natural alternatives, the very first one that I think of is we look at the dopamine pathway and what does directly impact dopamine. If we look at what directly does increase dopamine levels, it's L-dopa in the dopamine pathway. Now, one of the best natural ways of increasing L-dopa is something called Mucuna pruriens. In its seeds, it has anywhere from 2.5 to 5% of L-dopa, and it's something that is widely used to help increasing dopamine levels. And it's something that I love using with my patients and clients. But that being said, I am always careful about giving this because sometimes people don't always have a direct dopamine problem. And if you add something like Mucuna pruriens and you have elevated levels of dopamine, you could have symptoms of stress, anxiety, agitation, and then you add something like Mucuna pruriens, it can make those symptoms even worse. And especially if you're someone that does take Adderall and you already get worse symptoms with it of feeling agitated and stressed, maybe taking a stimulant medication isn't the right option for you. Now, the second natural alternative to Adderall is looking at the very next step in the dopamine pathway and looking at what it does help increase L-dopa levels. So if you look at the actual dopamine pathway, you see that tyrosine is the next step when it comes to helping increasing L-dopa, then of course helping increasing dopamine levels. Now, tyrosine is something that you can get in your foods and it's considered more of a non-essential amino acid. However, I do see that a lot of times, especially with my ADHD patients, that I'll see that their tyrosine levels are low, and it's because they're not getting enough from certain diets to get it, or there's certain enzymes that they specifically aren't producing to help getting enough tyrosine levels. And so the one that I usually typically like to recommend is an L-acetyl L-tyrosine, which in my opinion is one of the best forms to use to get easy absorption of tyrosine levels to help improve the tyrosine, which then in return are going to help improve dopamine levels if that is the problem. And because we're helping dopamine, this does, in a way, have a more gentler way of approaching what Adderall does for people who have ADHD. Now, the third alternative to Adderall is, I would still say it is related to the dopamine pathway and taking it to the next step. So we talked about tyrosine. What does build tyrosine levels? Well, it's phenylalanine. And phenylalanine is an essential more amino acid that you do have to get from your diet. And I find that people with ADHD do not get enough proteins, amino acids in their diet. So they'll suffer of not getting enough phenylalanine in their diet, which in return does not help improve PA, which is phenylethylamine, which is an important excitatory neurotransmitter, which is the very beginning of the dopamine pathway, which helps this whole process of helping dopamine and helping give you the effects that you want as a natural alternative of Adderall. So the supplement that I typically will recommend is DL-phenylalanine. Now, why DL-phenylalanine instead of L-phenylalanine or D-phenylalanine? Well, because DL-phenylalanine is definitely the more easily absorbed one and be able to utilize in the body the most effective. And this is the one that I see that's very effective with my patients and clients. Now, there are some other ways to help improve dopamine levels without it being in the dopamine pathway. One of the important things is improving GABA levels, because GABA helps the expression of both dopamine and serotonin, helping increasing both serotonin and dopamine levels. And one of the most effective natural alternatives for increasing GABA levels is L-theanine. L-theanine is known to actually cross the blood-brain barrier to help improve GABA levels, which then is going to help improve and increase the expression of dopamine. If you're suffering with ADHD, then you should definitely download my free ADHD health guide in the description below, where I talk all about supplements, blood work, labs that you should do, nutrients to implement. That's all in the description below. The fifth alternative is also another indirect way of helping improving dopamine, which is definitely going to give you those effects that you can get from Adderall, which this particular herb facilitates the production and proliferation of dopamine producing cells. The herb I'm referring to is Rhodiola rosea extract. It's a great powerful herb, not only to help with improving dopamine, but it also does help with the calming effects, which in a way can definitely help with the production of dopamine, but also relaxation, which a lot of people with ADHD suffer with that high anxiety, which Rhodiola is a great one to use. The other thing about Rhodiola is believe that the mechanism of action does increase the permeability of crossing the blood-brain barrier, which then leads into the precursor of dopamine, which then will help increase dopamine levels. I talked about the 5 strongest ones that I see that are alternatives to Adderall, but there is other important steps within the dopamine pathway that you really do need to consider. So if you're deciding to take any supplements, now of course talk with your doctor first about this, But what's also important is to look at all what we call as cofactors that help each one of these steps, going from tyrosine to L-dopa to dopamine, even from phenylalanine to tyrosine. There's definitely important cofactors that help with this process. And some of the most important types of vitamins that help with these processes that can actually help with the effects of getting a natural Adderall effects is going to be vitamin D as well as iron. And probably the most important one is activated form of vitamin B6. Now, I do find this is very common, especially amongst people with ADHD, is they tend to be deficient in all three of these different vitamins. And this is why we do see a problem of why people with ADHD suffer with having that motivation and drive and focus, because they help with the building and modulation of dopamine and also norepinephrine. Now, if you're someone that has been struggling with taking Adderall and are looking for alternatives, it does require looking at further investigation of the root causes of the problem with your ADHD. Supplements can be a great stepping stone, but it takes a lot more than just doing supplements when it comes to alternative ways and understanding really what are the biochemistry imbalances that you have. So if you want further help and guidance, then you should watch this video next, where I go in deep talking about the root causes of your ADHD and what I do with my patients and clients. So watch this video next.